Welcome to the mysterious Book Emporium. This week we continue on with more short stories set in Thetis from the novel Tevinter Nights. So why don't you take a seat as we go over the next 3 stories in the collection. Callback by Lukas Kristjanson, Luck in the Gardens by Sylvia Feketekuty, and Hunger by Brianne Battye. Callback. Donald Sutherland takes off his helmet to take in the view of Skyhold, thinking how every day he spent there was the best day. Him, Shade, and Voth had arrived there at first light. They had been asked to go to the now mostly empty fortress because no word had come from there. After the Inquisition had dissolved and left Skyhold, something had to be done with it. The Inquisition refused to raise it, and nations across Thetis refused to leave it empty, as it could be taken over by someone less peaceful. So it was decided to become a sort of museum, preserved as it was. A Chantry brother was chosen to head the operation along with a few other helpers. Recently, a report from the caretaker had been odd. He had started to finish the last mural in the rotunda, something he was not told to do, and something odd was happening. His last words in the reports were, "I have made mistakes." A supply caravan came to check on what had been happening, and they too went silent. Shade tells the others that it feels wrong to be without Rat, Sutherland's dwarven squire, but they had a plan. When they received the order to check on Skyhold, they had made their way there, but made some stops along the way. Rat had held back on his orders. They find Skyhold's cable lift, used to bypass the large stairs to the keep, in good condition and lower it for Rat. Sutherland had his suspicions that those nobles who sent him to Skyhold were sort of using him. He was loyal to Skyhold and the Inquisition, so would keep quiet if something was wrong, but at the same time was small enough to go missing without much fuss. And if it all went wrong, an excuse to erase the Inquisitor's legacy. But he didn't really mind. He had no regrets about his time in the Inquisition, and he wouldn't let failing to protect its legacy be one of them. The veil at Skyhold was very thin, and with everything that had happened there, Sutherland's company assumed it was a demon that had taken over. The only problem was they didn't know what kind. But either way, the plan was to make the demon concentrate on them. Carefully stepping into the keep proper, it was oppressively quiet, with no wind to speak of. While Voth and Shade are unsettled, Sutherland smiles. He owes everything he has now to this place and the Inquisitor. While he was able to earn back every coin plus interest that the Inquisitor spent on him and his group, he still felt like he owed them more. Keeping Skyhold safe would be one more way to pay them back. Shade brings Sutherland out of his head to pay attention to the stables, where they find the body of Skyhold's caretaker. His arm is nailed to the frame of the door and his torso slashed by something unknown. On closer inspection, they notice that the caretaker had nailed his own arm to the wood, and something had come for him later. Shade notes that he looks like he has been dead for at least a week. Voth comments that demons tend to tempt and confuse. The man may have realized he was being used and stopped himself from doing any more harm. Voth then takes out a knife and examines the man's fingers. They are colored, with plaster under the nails. He had been in the middle of restoring the fresco. Together they take the man down and cover his body with a blanket from the stables. Voth places a ward over the body so that it would not be manipulated by blood magic. The trio talk about what they know. In short, not much. Suddenly, a sound beyond the gate. It's the clanking of the cable lift rising. "We can't wait," Sutherland said. "It has to feel us." "Maybe they shouldn't come," says Shade. The words had barely left her lips when a sudden gust of wind threw the doors of the main keep open. They slammed into the stone framework, causing a ringing in their ears that seemed to change to a distant howl as it faded. The 3 of them exchanged shocked looks and ran forward, ready to face whatever was waiting. Together they look into the great hall, but nothing is there. Voth is able to sense the demon now, but cannot get what its name is as it moved too fast. Sutherland notes that the body of the caretaker is also gone from where they had placed it. Stepping inside the great hall, Shade asks when was the last time Sutherland saw the frescoes. He mentions that it was right after the Temple of Mythal, as the trio left Skyhold soon after to avoid the rush when Corypheus was defeated. Shade mentions that she heard there was one more panel. They hear whispers coming from what seems to be Veilfire in the rotunda and step inside. While everywhere else in Skyhold had been spotless so far, drops of dried blood scatter the floor. Above it all, the cages that had once held Skyhold ravens are filled with dismembered body parts, the other missing people. In the center of the room, the desk that once belonged to Soulless still stands, except now the body of the caretaker lies on top of it. The trio notices strange sounds then and realize that it's coming from the plaster. Starting on one end, pigments from the fresco start to move, leaving parts pale and dusty. A rush of air suddenly slams all the doors shut, furniture blocking all the exits. But still, the pigment shadow moves to the 8th panel. The mass of plaster began to rise out of the wall, revealing a shape that was both canine and dragon, a wolf that had somehow absorbed a dragon. With a sickening crack, it popped out from the wall, opening too many eyes and standing just as tall as the other frescoes. Behind him, Sutherland notices that both Voth and Shade had gone still, but above him, a slight hint of movement. He yells at the demon, demanding to know what it is. In a smile that spread too quickly, it replies, "I am the heart of what was here." As it spoke, it raised an arm, one of 3, and pointed at the fresco panels in order. "An echo that has breached the fade." The creature's arm finished its path at Sutherland's friends, and I can still the bravest blade or magic. The limb folded into the creature's layers, each movement adding to the rasping sound. It rose to its full height, as high as the panels would have allowed, and bellowed its name so loud the dust fell from the walls. "I am Regret." Shade wasn't in the rotunda anymore. She's 14 and running through an alley in Dale's End. She can hear her own voice saying she won't be anything, and her mother calling her true name. Voth is lost in the woods. He wasn't good with anything but magic, but he could try to find his way to Val whatever, and he would speak little, because if he did, he would have to tell, and behind him a bear crushes a brother into dirt. The demon speaks to Sutherland, pointing to the frescoes, saying that there is so much regret in these deeds. Does he even know the dread that is coming? Sutherland then calls out that he has no regrets and stabs the creature in the chest, shoving it back. It leaves a wound that is covered back in plaster and takes a moment to reorganize itself. Sutherland looks up to see a small gloved hand making a thumbs up above. He takes a moment to distract the demon, making sure that it's at a good angle. The demon tries to interact with the body of the caretaker, but is shocked by Voth's ward. Angry, the demon points at Sutherland's friends, and they begin to attack him. Suddenly, a voice rings out. Rat and Dagna are above them, and throw a large vase at Regret. It laughs, catching it, but a rune on the bottom causes it to explode, sending a mass of angry bees around the demon. The furniture blocking the doors falls away, and the cages fall from their weight onto the demon as well. Voth and Shade are also freed from their spell as Regret is busy with the insects. The trio try to make it out of the room, but are stopped again. "You will stay and face your choice," Regret reared up, 20 feet tall. "I am all that you have done, and my will is such that you—" A chair crashed on the demon's head, interrupting its rhythm. "Hands off my knight!" yelled Rat. The demon righted itself. "Your mistakes are mounting here. Beg and I will—" Thunk! Another chair cut it off. Rat waved at the demon. "I am the regret of a god, you—" A rune stuck to the bottom of the last chair exploded at the creature's feet. The demon races upward towards the dwarves, chasing Rat outside into Skyhold's gardens. Meanwhile, Dagna finds Sutherland, confirming that the others are here and ready to fight. Racing through the garden balcony, Rat is caught up in one of Regret's visions and falls off, thankfully being caught by Harriet, although his leg is injured from doing so. The demon closes in on them, but something attracts his attention to the bar. In the courtyard, Sutherland meets Morris. They need to think of a way to best defeat the demon. A crashing sound cuts them off as Rat helps Harriet to hobble out of the Great Hall. In the tavern, Regret smashes through the entrance, seeing Cabot tending the bar. Regret calls out to him, taunting, but the dwarf tells him to shove it. He's a bartender, and he drowns Regrets. He throws a Molotov cocktail towards the demon, who steps out of the way. Except that an elven woman steps into view, taking a pouch and gently blowing on the powder inside to ignite the flames even further, hurting the demon. The pair quickly run out of the tavern for safety while the demon burns, flirting as they go. All together now, the group tries to think of a plan. There isn't much to go on, and then Sutherland gets an idea. He asks Shade what she saw when the demon got into her head. She hesitates, but finally says the moment of her biggest regret. The others who were affected confirm this. He tells his friends to get the demon's attention and to bring it to him, and for Shade to come with him. The others pair up, ready for attack, while Sutherland and Shade head to the stables. He tells her that, like the Inquisitor stood for all of them, he will stand for his friends now. He wants her to wait by the kitchen stairs, and if something goes wrong, she has to agree to not let him hurt the others. Rat is able to draw the demon, now reformed, to the main group. While the others attack, the demon is angry, fighting back. Sutherland was at the stables. He touched the frame where they had found the caretaker, tracing the blood with his fingers. He thought of the Inquisitor. "You stood for us," he said quietly. Shade shifted nervously on the stairs nearby, the stairs to the kitchens, where Sutherland could have started and now where he might end. He smiled at that and turned to look down the length of Skyhold. "Just like you," he said to himself, and he walked forward, slowly, deliberately. He saw flames at the Herald's Rest, chaos in both courtyards, a demon turning, growing arms for each of his friends. Even Dagna's smile faded, all because he brought them there. Sutherland stopped and held his sword upright in front of him, the blade flat against his forehead. He closed his eyes and breathed deep. "I regret," he yelled as loud as he could. The demon froze, its dragon canine ears twitching. It was split 7 ways, trying to steal all the mortals at once. It was frustrated, frenzied. But Sutherland's call was like a beacon. "I regret acting alone," yelled Sutherland. Regret turned to face the young warrior, its many eyes shifting around its head, centering on him. The one it couldn't touch. It could kill them all in turn, but this new sensation was so tempting and so familiar. It was as Sutherland was echoing the regret that had drawn it to Skyhold in the first place. Its arms grew more talons. "I regret using my friends," yelled Sutherland. The demon sneezed like it had been doused with a strong spice. Using the weight of the demon, Sutherland holds up his sword, cutting it almost in half. Fragments of plaster and pigment stream past him, and the weight is almost too much, his sword cutting into his shoulder. But he keeps going on until the demon lay around him. The others were a blur, quickly attacking it, not letting it have time to reform. It tries to scramble back to the rotunda, but is blocked by magic and Dagna, the demon finally falling. The core of the creature lay on its side, its too many eyes drifting unfocused. It could reform given time, but at this point even a few simple wounds would return its mind and will across the veil. For a moment the sunlight illuminated something within, a sliver of the spirit that might have been. Not the opposite of regret, a different flavor or shade. Contemplation, introspection. It felt the echo of the actions that had summoned it. There might have been a better choice, said a thought it had not been allowed. Together they all take one final stab. Sutherland's mind wanders to the farm he grew up on, to his father, and the small remains of regret whisper that it had known him before. But he just slams his sword down, the demon finally crossing the veil. "By the order of the most holy, her divine Victoria, you who have served are to be commended. And though the herald guides you no more, and legion and name are retired, know that you served good and true. Change comes, both to and because of the Inquisition, and we are blessed with the ability to accept and move on, to leave dread and regret behind. Know that Skyhold remains, its fires bright. Forevermore it is where you are from, not where you are bound. Attempt no travel there. Let the past guide you to a new direction, and be well." Luck in the Gardens. They may have been called many things, but they hate being called lucky, which is odd for a Lord of Fortune. They had been drinking in Darsmud with a few others, and it's time for them to tell their tale. A tale about Minrathous. They had gone there to look for a job and received a good tip for one. They had a wide range of talents, from pitching their voice in various ways to disguise themselves as any race and gender they like. Dressed up like a woman this time, they make their way to a tall, unremarkable building by the canal. On their way there, they see a splatter of wet blood. Odd, but nothing they care to find out about, for if they had, they likely would have ran right then and there. They climb into the tower and find the 3rd floor highly decorated, unlike the others. They then climb into the rafters, hiding themselves with a bottle they had snatched from a cabinet, and wait. An hour later, elves come into the room to prepare, and shockingly they look like paid servants, not slaves. Not long after, a group of mages come into the room and begin to play Wicked Grace. The group begins to make small talk about their social circles, and eventually the conversation head towards something important. The flyers for a beast that have killed people around the city, a reward for 5,000 aurum. Now, it wasn't actually 5,000. In reality, the real reward was 1,000. They had forged the flyers around this hideout, hoping the mages would bring it up during their conversation. There are rumors that it has something to do with the Venatori. All eyes stare at one mage at the table, a man with a top knot. He pouts, saying that he never was one, just went to a meeting once or twice. But he does have dinner with the magister that might have been part of the Venatori. He tells the group what he knows, that the Venatori didn't make or wake it, but they did stumble upon it searching for old caves under the city. It's somehow not a demon, and the Venatori didn't put up the reward either. It's then that the beam our narrator was hiding on cracks, and they crashed to the floor, thankfully falling on an empty couch. There is a moment of silence when one of the mages with the curled mustache jumps up and berates them for not keeping watch properly. He's covering for them. Dorian Pavis lies to introduce the others to his servants, Hollix. He had brought them there because his mother keeps wanting to find out where he's gambling money, and they were up in the rafters to look out the windows for spies. Hollix, as they are now known, begs for forgiveness, and Maevaris asks if they really are with Dorian, which he again confirms. However, this moment has ruined the evening, so he takes Hollix and the paid servants that were seen earlier and leaves. Outside, Dorian introduces himself properly, asking for Hollix's real name, but they claim they're actually quite fond of Hollix. Dorian laughs. Apparently it was the name of his mother's old pet Nug that had died some time back. He invites Hollix to dinner, plucking one of the forged flyers from their vest, saying they have some things to talk about. At the Pavis estate, Hollix admires the view of the public gardens. Not long after their light supper, Magister Maevaris Talani comes in and is quite charmed by Hollix, who she jokingly calls Trouble. Dorian then brings up the forged flyers. He reveals that he was the one who set up the original 1,000 reward. When asked why, he simply states that it's killing people, and he wants to keep his city safe, and the Magisters won't do anything about it until it takes one of their own. When asked why they don't go after it on their own, May and Dorian reply that they're just too busy trying to keep the Magisterium under control, as there are some political rumblings starting to happen. The card game was one of their tricks, trying to befriend a few to gain support for their cause. Hollix then asks what is known about the monster. Dorian pulls out a lovely map of the city, marked with 9 locations of the 9 known murders. The press has dubbed the creature Sycorax, a mispronunciation of an old Tevinter word for headsman, as all 9 bodies did not have their heads, and they were never found. Dorian rolls up the mat and places it in a beautiful map case, which he hands to Hollix. They thank him, quietly steal some supplies from his estate before they go, and heads off to the garment-making district the next morning where the last murder happened. People are willing to talk, but not many know much. However, one person had escaped the monster. Hollix let it be known that he wants to speak with them and waits under a tree. A little girl hangs upside down above him, eating fruit from its branches. She questions what they are doing, and Hollix explains that they will be hunting the monster. She introduces herself as Mizzy and goes on to say that the monster had killed some of her friends. A whole family murdered. She heard screams and ran to get her sister for help, but when they returned with the guards, it was too late. While she didn't see the monster, she did know how it got into the house. Hollix promises to kill the monster. The little urchin girl took Hollix to a large sewer grate, saying she saw something slither back into this hole. Hollix expresses doubt, but it's not like they had any other leads, and it was true that every victim on the map was located by one of these grates. Wading through the tunnels alone, they begin to notice a sickly blue glowing goo on the walls and ceiling, as it had been painted there. It wasn't long after that they begin to hear something, and then suddenly a mass of tentacles shot out of the water. Hollix is able to cut a few of the tentacles off, but they formed to make a blade, so they ran. Slip gently. A rope of tentacles splattered behind me. There was a delicate noise, like air tearing. Part of my cloak fluttered into the muck. I ran faster, legs pumping. The thing lopped off more cloth like it was playing. Stay with us, it cooed. It's hard to explain the joyful malice radiating from it. You could feel it, like cold in the water. Come inside, where it's warm. There is room in the crown of the blind. Hollix tries to block an attack with a saber, but their weapon is cut in half. Finally, they take out something they made from the supplies in Dorian's stockroom, a sort of smoke bomb. They're able to get away, but they hear the voice all too close, the Sycorax whispering for them to come back, that they are a sweet end, and they should stay safe inside of them. Hollix notices a single tentacle near them and smashes it, ending the voice and fleeing from the sewers, right into a well-guarded Templar barracks. The Templars try to throw them in jail for trespassing, but they are able to get away. It was at this moment that Hollix believes this job isn't worth it. They change into an Arlesian disguise and take one final look at the public gardens before they leave. It's a beautiful place, with magic in the leaves and large water fountains. Looking at a tree, they then notice a strange sight. A nest of bird bones, with freshly killed bird corpses all missing their head in a ring around it. They watch as a single tentacle slips behind a knot in a tree, a brown eye looking up at them. The Sycorax was watching them, and had placed that there just for them. As they looked around the garden, they noticed small signs that it has infested the entire area. It calls out to Hollix, showing that it could kill anyone here it wanted. However, they are able to stop it from hurting a slave. Fortunate, the Sycorax gurgled, too close behind me. It didn't sound angry. I can't tell you why, but I had the feeling I amused it. Why shouldn't I? I hadn't done any real damage. Grabbing that watering jar and hurling it, as in the sewer, I just managed to slow it down. The gate out of the gardens was so close. Could I outrun it? Would it let me go? Would it permit me a few steps, then lop my head off and hide my body in a lotus pond? No more false faces, no masks. Become soft and blind in the crown of me. That energized me. My art is my own, and no maker-forsaken thing was going to take it. I ran past the gates to shade and freedom. Hollix runs from the gardens, making their way to the docks. They will send Dorian a letter and be off on the next ship. Suddenly, a Templar yells at them to stop. Hollix is surprised that this Templar has seen through their disguise, but the Templar shouts that they noticed the map case they had been carrying. Hollix runs and is eventually cornered in an alley. Just then, something drops on the Tevinter's heads, and lightning pops from a small container, stunning them all. A small voice calls out to Hollix. It's Mizzy, who helps them up and to escape. Mizzy had been following Hollix and questions if they were going to leave, despite their promise to kill the monster to avenge her friends. They lie, saying that they found a way to kill the monster, but to stay away from the gardens in the meantime. It's clear she doesn't believe them. Hollix feels guilty, but something about the bottle of lightning she had made them think. Mizzy had told them that she was a runner for an older chemist, who lets her keep the things that don't work right. They ask her if she would like to make 100 aurum, and her eyes go wide. Using various disguises, Hollix and Mizzy buy supplies for the chemist she works for, and plant them, along with some other things, in the garden, hoping that the monster does not recognize them behind the costumes. They both tell Dorian the plan. It's dark when the people in the gardens are driven out by a smoke that burns the lungs. Hollix tells Mizzy to stand where Dorian and May are and to watch for their signal, which will likely be yelling and screaming of some sort. They give her a bangle after she compliments their clothes and then leaves, telling them not to die. Hollix goes into the gardens alone, and the Sycorax calls out to them again. From the corner of their eye, they notice 2 small blue dots in the distance. Dorian and May are taking lyrium. Sycorax! I coughed again, and projected my best pleading and yearning, a hopelessness that not enough is all life would ever be. Here I am. I give up. You can have me. If I beg a favor. Just one thing. I've only seen part of you. Your whole great Sycorax. Before I die, that's all I want to see. The fountain gurgled and ice sprang out from the bushes and under the water, strands of rope brazenly coiling up the trees. Yes, that awful voice fluted to me. Its flesh poured into the lawns around the fountain, churning balls of worms connecting and reforming. One teasingly sliced off one of my dangling scarves, held it in front of a curious eye, as more and more of the monster drew itself out of the gardens in front of me. I backed away, climbing onto the stone lip of the fountain. A 4-headed stone dragon spewed water into the basin. Look, the Sycorax said, as a mass as tall as a house undulated up. It peeled open the top like a lily and tilted forward so I could see. There was a ring of heads, dozen, not just 9. Their eyes were plucked out, their flesh otherwise whole and healthy. Squeezing tendrils ran inside, caressing the cheeks. A crown of the blind, lovingly carried inside that atrocity. When the Sycorax spoke, their silent mouths formed the dripping words. Come inside and see. They must have screamed and waved their arms as suddenly magic is happening around them, attacking the Sycorax. A bomb placed on the nearby water reservoir explodes, sending a crash of water in the gardens. Hollix is able to climb on a statue for safety. The bulk of the Sycorax rises out of the water, largely unharmed by it all, taunting them to join its crown of heads with their true face. Hollix grabs a harpoon that Mizzy had hidden earlier by the statue and punctures the bulk of the monster. While it doesn't do much, Hollix yells their cue, and a large lightning bolt hits the metal coil attached to the harpoon. The Sycorax yells, and the main mass topples and pops, the blue glowing liquid pouring out of it, and its tentacles stomping. Hollix tells the dying mass that they have a message to deliver, that this was for Mizzy. Dorian and Hollix are in a carriage heading towards the docks. Dorian saying that it was one of the most disgusting things he had seen in all his life. When he and May had gone to clean up the mess, all they found was some sort of skin. I must ask, what was the Sycorax? Dorian smoothed down one side of his mustache. That soggy mess didn't do much to clear that up. Some ancient breed of demon? Some fiend brewed up by a magister? He looked pensive. I was at a party with one of those necromancers from down south a while ago. 5 cups in, she went on about things past the veil of our world. Neither demon nor spirit. Perhaps it wasn't the tipsy nonsense I assumed it to be. He goes on to explain that the boat that will take Hollix home is a gift from May. They will handle how to explain what happened in the garden to the rest of the magisterium. Hollix lifts up their purse, now filled with 500 aurum. They had given Mizzy the other 500 and told her and her sister to get out of Tevinter. She had been excited, saying that now that she is a rich lady, she can go home and take care of some relatives in some other nations. She hugged them before she left, and Hollix comments that she would make a good lord of fortune if she was interested when she grew up. Dorian thanks Holix before they leave, and they note that he is being very generous. Dorian jokes that he wouldn't want them to think Minrathous was a bad city, and Holix replies that they would never come back, even if they were paid. Both laugh and wave goodbye. Anyway, that's the story on how they had gotten such a beautiful map case. Hunger. Darkspawn blocked the road ahead for Grey Wardens Antoine and Evka Ivo. The last time Antoine had fought Darkspawn, he had almost died, but he wasn't a Grey Warden then. They were both outnumbered and surrounded. Evka uses her short axe to kill a few that charge them, while Antoine throws a flask at the nearest Hurlock. However, it just bounces off of his chest. That wasn't exactly the plan. Antoine apologizes to Evka before being knocked into a tree. Seeing an opportunity, he quickly picks up a rock and throws it at the vial that didn't break, sending black smoke everywhere. Evka gripes that a warning would have been nice, but the two finish off with Darkspawn. Evka Ivo of Orzammar was also fairly new to the Wardens, only being one for 3 years. She had been the one who found Antoine. Darkspawn had attacked some more Legion servants, and they only lived because Antoine, also a servant, was able to buy time for the others. He had been tainted and was almost dead, where he was given the joining and survived. The two had been ordered to go to a quiet outpost. They weren't even halfway there when new orders came for them to go to Weishaupt Fortress in the Anderfels. They had only crossed the vague border a few days ago, but they were still far from the fortress. Walking through a rainy forest towards their destination, a young woman stumbles upon them. She is scared and covered in scratches from the branches she had been running through. The wardens try to calm her down, asking what is chasing her, but she can't say. She introduces herself as Mina Bauer, from the nearby village of Eichweil. She tells the wardens that she isn't sure what it is, but it's not human, and people have been going missing. Antoine vows to help her, and Evka tells her to leave them. It's almost midnight when they arrive in the village. It was small and gray, looking on the verge of collapse. Mina leads them to an inn where an older man opens the door. He is surprised to see Mina, thinking that she would have died after she ran off. He introduces himself as Verschel, both the innkeeper and the tailor for the village. He leads the Grey Wardens to the latest attack site, filling them in on the details. The attack started in the summer, and it started to grow in number. Now they happen a few times a week. They pass by an old burned-down house and an empty mansion, but they stop at a destroyed shack. Tonight's victim. There is blood around the area, and Evka goes to investigate. Mina notes that the victim was her brother, Willem, who was missing. Antoine asks what has brought on the attacks, and a villager notes that the whole town is cursed. Mina hopes that the attacks are Darkspawn, because then the wardens will be required to stay. But Evka notes that it isn't the case. Willem had obviously attacked whatever it was, and the blood was not Darkspawn. Both wardens couldn't sense any nearby either. Mina is frantic, but Antoine tells her and everyone that they will help the village. However, they aren't convinced, and the wardens turn in for the night. The next morning, Evka questions Verschel about the odd buildings in town. The burnt-out building happened about 5 years ago, when Apostates had barricaded themselves inside from their hunters. The old mansion belonged to the town's noble family, the Renkes. The older folks were nice enough, but the younger son was awful, killing a chantry brother when he was caught stealing. The town had ran him out, leaving him to die in the winter. Verschel tells the two more tales of odd happenings in the town, and it becomes clear to the wardens why the villagers believe the place is cursed. At each attack site, it was clear that something powerful had attacked, but they weren't sure what. Mina tells them of a place in the woods where a hunter had gone missing a while ago, and the two set off for there. Reaching the place where the hunter vanished, they are able to find his arm, the ends chewed by large teeth. Evka is a skilled tracker in the deep roads and a passable one on the surface, so she leads the two looking for clues. They end up finding a mutilated ram, but Antoine is worried for once. He is wary, looking around, and tells Evka that it has not been eaten. An animal would have eaten it. "A lure?" Antoine asked. "A call." The voice came from the trees, cold and scraping like an axe over stone. Evka had her own axe ready before I could finish the words. Antoine whipped his bow in the direction of the sound. "Then we're called," Evka said, keeping her voice cold. If it wanted to scare them, she wouldn't give it an edge. "Not for you. Not yet. For my own." The voice was behind them now, and Antoine spun around. Evka moved to stand with her back to him. But nothing emerged from the woods around them. The wind began to pick up with its strange, hollow moaning. She felt Antoine take a step away from her. He looked pale, and his face a look of troubled concentration, the way it did when he was trying to shut out Darkspawn, but that's not what this was. Still, he kept his bow on the trees. Then the moaning stopped. That night, Antoine dreams that he is dying, a nightmare of the events that led him to become a warden. But then, a dwarf was asking him questions. He had fallen asleep during supper, and Evka was waking him for a patrol. Given what they had seen, they talked to some of the villagers to help them take turns to protect the village. As they walk, they try to come up with something when the moaning sound returns. Then a scream. The wardens and the villagers find a man that had been on their patrol, gutted by the well. The villagers are angry with the wardens that it was their job to protect them, but suddenly one of the villagers on the outside of the crowd is pulled into the shadows. There is a moment of silence before the screaming stops, then panic sets in. Evka and Antoine run after the shadow, but the elf is able to run faster than his dwarven companion. The shadow he chases runs on all fours and is fast, but Antoine is able to keep pace. Around a building he goes, but he spies Evka still chasing a shadow. A different one. There are more. He is able to shoot one of them, and in the dark corners the beast, but it somehow disappears, shocking Antoine. Evka finds him and he explains what happened. He walks to where the beast was, and Evka grabs him before he disappears too. There was a hidden ravine that the creature had dropped into. The wardens climbed down and walked the path, finally coming to an opening. With a reedy howl, 4 beasts emerged from the trees in front of them. They walked upright, but it didn't look comfortable. Their limbs were overlong, their movements jerky and awkward. But when they ran, they dropped to all fours. Dark, patchy fur rose in spiky hackles on their necks. They snarled as they charged, muzzles full of sharp teeth, yellow eyes lit with malice. Shit! Evka swung at their attacks. She hadn't sensed them up ahead. This was why Darkspawn were easier. The wardens are attacked by the werewolves. Antoine is uncomfortable killing them as they were humans once, and there is a chance the curse could be lifted. But when one tries to kill Evka, he shoots to kill. They're able to kill all but one, and Antoine stops Evka from attacking the wolf, as that one didn't try to attack them. The werewolf fell back to its knees and whimpered. Help! The word came out like a choke, as if formed by cords not meant for speech. Evka swore. Antoine was walking slowly towards the werewolf, weapon lowered. That friendly smile on his face, though his eyes were at least wary. What's your name? Antoine asked, his voice light, as if talking to a child. Willem, the werewolf coughed. It sounded almost sulky. Mina's brother, Evka breathed. Willem goes on to explain that he didn't kill any of the villagers, asking where Mina is. They explain that she is safe. He doesn't want to go back with them, fearing that he might hurt the other villagers, but Evka swears that he won't hurt anyone and they will free him from the curse. The next morning, the wardens visit Willem, who is chained up in a stable. Mina had insisted on staying close by. All 3 try to ask questions to Willem to try to get more information, but something is holding him back. Antoine tries one more time, saying that really anything he can say would help them. The werewolf eventually mutters something about a chantry, and Mina knows what he means, a deserted and broken chantry outside the city. Walking towards the broken chantry, Evka tells Antoine that they can't be gentle with the leader of the werewolves, and that there is a chance that killing it won't free Willem. We need to save Willem, he said, pacing away and then back again. He won't be the only one at risk if we're not careful. If you don't want me to, I don't want you to die. He stopped and looked at her. He was standing very still. It made her nervous when he stood that still. It meant he was focusing 100 thoughts on something, and right now that something was her. The forest was very quiet. Where was that damn crow when you needed it? Then Antoine's expression changed. Why are you smiling? He laughed. I don't know. You don't want me to die. And that's your response? He was standing very still again. Evka, I'll do everything I can. I know. She started walking again before the conversation could continue. They reached the chantry then, and it was covered in wild rose bushes. It was in bad shape, with one wall broken down and half of the roof caved in. But they went into the front door anyway, hearing that low moaning again in the fog. Antoine takes out a canary firework that he had bought in the village, and it shoots sparks. He tosses the cylinder away from himself, and a large shadow is illuminated in the fog. It speaks to them, the same voice they had heard in the forest not long ago. It asks about Willem, saying that the curse will take him in full soon, and even his sister couldn't stand in his way. It dawns on Evka that the werewolf knows the people of the village. The beast's voice lost its echo. They left me for dead. I took what was mine. Renke, Evka said, remembering the Tor of Ishwel, the noble son who had murdered the Chantry brother. The sound of the name drew the beast's focus. It stalked lazily towards her, its voice doubled again. It was winter. He didn't know how to escape the woods. He was starving, he hungered. Then he hungered for more. We will feast on Ishwel. Then back to a single chord. After I watch them writhe. Evka demanded to know what demon possessed him, but Antoine knows. It is hunger. Renka charges at Evka then, throwing her into a support beam that crashes on top of her. Antoine tries to run to her, but Renka pins him to the ground. His head ached as the demon pried into his mind. It gripped onto one moment in his past. Ah, yes, you have hungered. When you were dying, what did that feel like? It burned and you couldn't think straight. It felt like nothing, and that was just as bad. That's over, Antoine said. He focused on the memory of Evka's voice telling him what had happened. He was a warden now, a hero. The demon laughed. Did you think you'd escaped? Antoine struggled beneath Renke's paws. He needed a way out. He needed a plan. What you have's not what you thought, is it? You're depraved the admiration, the heroics. Evka is able to free herself from the beam, but she wouldn't be able to make it to her companion in time. However, before Renke is able to bite him, he is able to throw a glass vial into the monster's mouth, spewing black smoke when it chomped down. Evka can hear Renke howling in pain from a close-range arrow strike. The werewolf runs into the fog, and the wardens are unable to find him again. Antoine tells the villagers that they will think of a plan, but they are all unimpressed by the lack of results, and perhaps a little shocked that Renke was back. Frustrated by the villagers' attitude, Antoine leaves to check on Willem, and Evka follows. However, he is too far gone and tries to attack them. Mina is there. She had been waiting with her brother, and even she is disappointed in them, although she's nicer about it. Antoine walks to the town's well and kicks it. The words of the hunger demon are stuck in his head. Evka tries to comfort him, but he tells her that when he was dying, he didn't want to. If a demon had come, would he have accepted? Evka sat down next to Antoine. Here's what I know about being a Grey Warden. You fight the worst monsters in Thetis, most people don't notice, and then you do it again. We've got a thankless village, a werewolf we've barely been able to hit, a demon that can get into my head, Antoine offered, and that. That's what wardens do. We take all of that and handle it, because someone has to. You're a warden because everything that could go wrong has, and you're still here. She punched him gently on the shoulder and smiled. All we need is a plan. All he wanted was to sit at the well with her a little longer. Antoine stands up and Evka asks if he has a plan. He says not a good one, but it's somewhere to start. Evka stands by the well the next night, alone. Behind her, lights flickered in the old Renke house. Just as was expected, she hears Renke coming from the forest. He asks her where a friend is, and she refuses to say. Something bangs in the old home, and Renke takes notice. She explains that he kills those who are alone, so they have brought everyone together in his old home. Renke is upset and charges towards the door, but Evka is able to stick a dagger into him. Standing between him and the door, he charges at her again, but she is able to dodge out of the way. The beast crashes through the front of the home. Antoine watches from the top of the stairs as Renke stumbles into the home in an explosion of splinters. It looks around, confused at the empty rooms. The Grey Wardens had told the villagers to stay out of sight and not light anything that night, which they were happy to do. They then had filled the rooms of the homes with lanterns, flickering too many shadows on the wall to mimic people. Renke howls as Evka attacks it again. It hurls her into the fireplace and pins her to the ground. Before it's able to hurt her, Antoine hurls something into its head, getting its attention. It chases after him, and Antoine runs into some small bedroom on the second floor. Renke picks the elf up, taunting him. His new life as a werewolf will be more fulfilling, and he will gnaw on Evka's bones. She finally catches up to them, but it's too late. Renke bites Antoine in the shoulder. Antoine calls out to Evka, simply saying, "Distraction," before throwing the Canary firework. Renke is surprised, and both Evka and Antoine take advantage of the situation, with Evka managing to cut his throat and Antoine kicking the werewolf out of the window, the monster landing with a sickening crunch. Leaving the building to make sure it was dead, a crowd had formed around the corpse. Rochelle merely said that it was over, and it was the highest praise Antoine had hoped for. Mina, meanwhile, was running towards her brother. Later, Evka and Antoine say goodbye to the people of Eichwil. They weren't that thankful, and most were unenthusiastic, but Willem was back to normal, minus his new yellow eyes, and him and Mina had waved as they left. On the road again, Antoine and Evka joke with each other and begin their journey again to Weishaupt Fortress, because that's just part of being a warden. Discussion. So, first I would like to give thanks to this week's artist, Phoenix Wolf, for their rendition of the Regret Demon from Callback. They've given me a Tumblr to link to, which I have below, so please go check them out. So the obvious thing here is that all the characters mentioned in the short story, minus the Skyhold caretaker, are real NPCs that you can meet around Skyhold. One thing I didn't include was that the story had actually given a little update to where these characters were after the events of Trespasser. Sir Donal of the Hinterlands, Her Shade, Lady of Evasol, and Sir Voth Delon were recently given a noble title and a minor holding. Harrod is now part of an Orlesian guild of likely blacksmiths, but still does business in Ferelden. Morris currently owns a network that armors southern Thedas, along with traveling to sell some home goods. He has gotten a little grayer and a little plumper. Cabot seems the same, but also seems to be in a relationship with Alanva Maul. Dagna, interestingly enough, has nothing about her fate, not even a little hint at what she's been up to. Could that mean she shows up in the next game, or perhaps just trying to dance around if she's in a relationship with Sarah or not? I'm not really sure. From Joy, Rat, and far behind her darkspawn claws ended a Paragon's line. Wish we had her age for context on this one. A Dukin is an easy guess with all the fratricide, but there are many more houses to choose from. I personally don't think it would be the Adukin line, as there are plenty of world states where the family line is doing just fine, and the story does a pretty decent job otherwise at sidestepping world state choices. Honestly, my first thought was House Kondrat, or more commonly known as the house that decided to dissolve to become House Branca and was later all killed in the Deep Roads by their Paragon's insanity. Many were killed by Darkspawn, and it would make sense that a young Rat would be able to escape. However, these events would be 10 years from when the story is set, and Rat does sound very young. So unless she was a very small child, like 7 or 8, the timeline just really wouldn't match up here. There are a few things that are confirmed about Skyhold in the story, although some of these have been subtly mentioned elsewhere. The first is that it takes a week to climb from the base of the mountain to Skyhold, likely meaning that montage of the Inquisitor scatting to the north was about a week long. Second, to help pack animals and lazy nobles, a cable lift was created to bypass some of the stairs you can see from Skyhold. You can't actually see the lift in-game, so I do wonder if it was something added later after Corypheus was defeated. And finally, the final number of people working for the Inquisition was about 10,000. I've seen a lot of people complain that this story can't be canon to them as they didn't disband the Inquisition, as the story keeps making reference to the fact that the Inquisition is no more. But here's the thing. No matter what you chose, you did disband the Inquisition. The choice wasn't to keep the Inquisition as is or get rid of it, but to either get rid of it completely or transform it into a new organization. If you didn't disband the Inquisition, what you did was, in a sense, create a new version of the Templars and the Seekers, although a bit different. You took all of your power, all of your people, and all of you and vowed it to the new divine, either being Cassandra, Liliana, or Vivian, to create a new peacekeeping force. So I think the story is mostly compatible with most world states, minus ones that put Sutherland in the kitchen or killed his company, in which case I guess Skyhold is still haunted by regrets. I'm not quite sure on that. Something that fans have questioned for years is why there even is a rotunda in Skyhold to begin with. In this little story, it looks like it was a question in-world as well. It was an odd use of space for a fortress. Shade has said it was perfect for important meetings because there were no corners to hide secrets. Whatever it was originally for, this hollow tower had become known for the frescoes. While it's likely in the game because it just looks cool, I do find it ironic that the room that would be hard to hide secrets in is the room that is filled with the most secrets in-game, and apparently in World 2, considering this story. Now, Regret has a lot going on with it as well, so let's just start from when it appears. The description of it gathering pigments seems to be highly symbolic of something, really. It takes the red out of the eye of the Inquisition, and the 2 wolves that guarded it. Some vague pigment from if you chose the Templars or Mages, which it really isn't clear on, so it doesn't really destroy world states, and then collects more from the shape of Corypheus. This is one of those moments where I think that perhaps this is going to make a little bit more sense in the future when the next game comes out, but for now, I guess I can just point it out and say, Next, the final panel. The final panel has always been something odd for the fans, as we couldn't really make out what it was supposed to be, but now with this description, we know the dragon likely represents Corypheus / his dragon, the sword is the Inquisition, and the dragon wolf is Soulless, threatening them all. Further, what my main takeaway from this was that the figure is both wolf and dragon. Even in the book, it states that it looked like the wolf absorbed a dragon, which we have seen in-game. I, like many others, have always assumed that absorbing part of Mythal had been the backup plan, that it was to be done because the orb was destroyed, but it seems like that wasn't the case. Soulless never made it back to Skyhold after the defeat of Corypheus. While he may have already made backup plans and assumed the orb was going to be destroyed, throughout the game he does seem to have some hope of recovering it and generally seems crushed when he sees its remains. Which, on all of this, from Joy, we have never seen a regret demon in-game. Perhaps they all look like this? Does this speak to Fen'Harel, the wolf, absorbing Mythal, the dragon? To answer my own question, I find this somewhat unlikely. I get the sense that Soulless' original plan was to reclaim his foci, and absorbing the essence of Mythal was a backup plan, one that he tried to avoid. So I do think we need to consider that maybe that's just what a regret demon looks like. However, if that really was the case, it's almost too on the nose given the circumstances, you know? Now, I totally understand and even agree that it seemed that Soulless had absorbed Mythal as the backup. And while we could also talk about this being a retcon, the in-game fresco does look a lot like both a dragon and a wolf. So given all the evidence, I'm inclined to believe that this was his plan all along, which is sort of a scary thought given that Mythal seems to be one of his oldest friends. So because of this fresco, we can assume one of two things. One, that after Corypheus opened up the new rift in the sky to draw out the Inquisitor, Soulless thought the orb was lost, committing to the plan to absorb Mythal then and there and slap down the plaster, even though he seemed honestly shocked that it was crack at the end of the game, so I don't know about that one. Or what I think is more likely is option 2, that he had planned to absorb Mythal no matter what. That was always the plan, and right before the final battle, he knew the Inquisitor would win, and he would come back to attack them with Mythal's power, creating the final panel. What I find interesting about this is that many of us had assumed that Mythal's power replaced the need for the orb, but apparently that's not the case. Soulless mentions in Inquisition, if you have low disapproval with him, that he would have gone into the Fade physically and reshaped reality from there. If that was his plan, then one can assume the orb was for doing that. So if he was still going to go with that route, what else could he use to rip open the veil? Well, we're going to put a pin on this, because I think the last story might have something to do with that, so stay tuned. Another thing about regret that I don't think comes as clear in my summary is that it becomes very formless. While reading, I was reminded of the chase scene in Spirited Away, where the creature No-Face stuffs himself on food and tries to eat the main character, and they run through the halls. This is where I would put a clip, but I couldn't actually find one on YouTube, so go watch Spirited Away, I guess. The last thing I want to talk about with regret is that it doesn't really die. It splits off into two. One is the spirit it could have been. As this demon was largely created based on the regrets that Soulless had during his time in the Inquisition, that little spirit should be too. A thought that there could be another way. And I think a part of what made that little spirit is the part that we might have to appeal to during Dragon Age 4. And you can see how hard that may be, seeing how small it was and how it was easily overpowered. The other part it became was still regret, but it moved on to something new. It glimpsed the spirit realm beyond the veil in a faraway glimmer, familiar and somehow far brighter than what had drawn it there. It knew where it would go. I'm not quite sure what that means, honestly. Perhaps it found Soulless again, perhaps it found something similar. Either way, we may end up seeing this demon again. Finally, I want to talk about the meta of the story. While at face value, it's a nice nostalgia piece on Skyhold and those we knew, I actually think there's a lot more to it. In a sense, I think Sutherland is you, the player that really enjoyed Inquisition and Skyhold. This is a little romp through old memories on how great your Inquisitor was, and a threat to come. But more than that, it really felt like a goodbye to Skyhold, especially that final bit from Divine Victoria. I have to say that while there is a slight hint that perhaps the frescoes could be pieced back together, it does sort of make me sad that they're mostly gone now. They were such an iconic piece of Inquisition, and while it was a great send-off for them, knowing that they're lost just kind of makes me a bit sad. And if we do ever come back, which, considering the story now, I almost think is doubtful, and they're not going to be there, that's kind of, I don't know, it makes me sad. So, right off the bat, we get a new faction in Thedas called the Lords of Fortune. Other than it being based out of Arraine, I can't really say too much on it. However, this faction comes up again later in the novel, and there's more things revealed there, so I'm actually going to save a rant on it for when that happens, as I do think the next short story that mentions it adds a few more things that we can discuss. Also, to make it easier on me, I've been referring to the protagonists of the story as Holics, as no other name is given, and they seem to enjoy it well enough. However, this is not their name, and they only go by it once or twice really in the beginning. It's not like they will be known as such when we meet them again. Oh, and I didn't mention this in the summary, but the name means something like irrepressible rascal in Old Tevin. So for me at least, probably the best part of this short story were the descriptions of the city from an outsider's perspective. Later on in the novel, we get to see Minrathous from people who live there, but in this, they can be as shocked at some of the scenery as we would be. Towers that float, glowing gardens, a street urchin given a magical device because why not? It's very different from anywhere else in Thedas that we've seen. So at one point, Holix mentions that they have been giving lessons from another Lord of Fortune on how to change your voice and accent. While not 100% confirmed because names aren't really dropped, it's likely that she is a character later on in the novel. Really starting in this short story, you start to hear references to other parts of the novel. It doesn't really happen too often, and reading it out of order from the novel doesn't really make any less sense, but something to keep in mind. The mages playing the card game also mentioned the wig maker and a man named Otho, both of whom we will talk about next episode, so I guess keep in mind that this story happens after those two, despite appearing first in the novel. I didn't mention it in the summary, but a lot of the mages of the card game are actually given a name. While most have no meaning to us now, I think there is a chance they could be. So, in order of appearance, Manius doesn't seem to be good at cards and likes going to the Sighing Pearl, which I'm going to assume is the brothel. Xanthan works on treaties, tends to tan in the summer. Paletra, the one teasing Xanthan. That's all I have on her. Callistus had gone to Venatori meetings, but swears he isn't one, is skinny with a top knot, takes supper with Magister Dulcia, and then of course there was Dorian and May. There are others that are mentioned but not present. Elarana buys creatures, many recently. Magister Dulcia, not confirmed, but Holix believes from context that she's likely part of Venatori. Seems to be in and out of a lot of marriages. From Joy, no one asked, but Aurum is Latin for gold. That's why the symbol of the periodic table is AU. And not mentioned, but Argentum is Latin for silver, periodic symbol AG. Would be nice for immersion if NPCs continue to use these terms, while we are in Tevinter because the actual currency would just be the same as always, just the vernacular would change. Just science nerd, don't mind me. No Joy. I asked because I had no idea what an aurum was, and I don't know why, but I didn't think of it being a Latin term. You have no idea how much this bothered me, and thank you so much for this. I also agree that it would be a great flavor text to substitute this word for gold in Dragon Age 4. So we get a little hint at Josephine in this chapter as well, as she had been the one to send some Antivan wine over to Dorian from her family vineyard. It's a red wine, and while there is apparently some feud between Ravani and Antivan wine, our Ravani protagonist is actually quite happy with the quality. We also learn that, finally, Dorian has stopped the use of slavery and has started to pay his servants. He quotes that someone down south helped him to see the error of his ways, and one can assume it was the Inquisitor. But I do wonder who that person is if the Inquisitor and Dorian didn't really like each other, or Dorian was never even recruited. Although he does still show up in Tevinter no matter what, that's not a lot of time to change one mind. From Yasht, they use the disguise of a Qunari slave when gathering the materials. This implies that Qunari slaves are common enough to blend in. I don't think that Qunari allow themselves to be captured and or held long enough in such numbers, especially since Sten says in Origins that Qunari can bite even through metal, given enough time. Well, I mean, there are other ways, especially in Tevinter, to create a slave. Even if Qunari can bite through metal, there are plenty of magical ways to bind a man that might be cheaper and easier for a slave owner. Even if a Qunari soldier would not allow themselves to be a slave, there are plenty of non-Qun Qunari that could be trapped in it. Perhaps some were even brought from Saharan as children. Oh, and there is actually artwork of Qunari slaves. Here is a smattering of some of that. When the battle goes down in the garden, it's mentioned that Qunari gatlock was used. This was surprising to some, as, at least of Dragon Age 2, the stuff had been locked away from non-Qunari. It's not quite explained in the story how they got a hold of it either, but I would like to submit a theory. In the very last stages of Trespasser, you can find a codex entry in the gatlock factory, and it's very clearly a recipe. If the Inquisitor found it, they likely have that knowledge now, and if it's not widespread by the time Dragon Age 4 comes out, at the very least, we can assume that Dorian would have had access to the formula. Even Holix, who seems to be Ravani, might have had the formula, as Ravane is fairly friendly with the Qunari people. And finally, what is the Sycorax? And honestly, I have no idea. We learn that it's not a demon, and it could be something from across the Veil, but either way, no one knows what it could be. It just is some horror that came out of nowhere and just had the strangest anatomy. It glows, it can easily fuse and unfuse with flesh, and has some sort of intelligence. Quite frankly, I kind of hate it and would rather not see it again. Not in like the I think it was bad way, but in like I would rather not have to think about scary things again way. Please don't make me fight this, BioWare. Please, just give me one thing. Warden Evka Ivo's family, House Ivo, is one we've actually seen throughout the series. Most famously, one member was the Dwarven man in the Dwarven Noble opening that joins your party, then falsely accuses you of killing your brother as he had been working for Balin. I I don't think I quite explained it well in the summary, but there is something going on in Evka's and Antoine's relationship. Something very slight, and I'm not sure the characters quite know what it will become. The best way to describe the feeling I got is that they are in a stage of their relationship where both are trying to determine if they will either be close friends or develop romantic feelings. Like, they have been too busy traveling and constantly being with each other to really think it over, but they know they are starting to really cherish the time and support they share. While the overarching narrative about the werewolves is fine, I found myself more interested in trying to figure out their relationship as they did. And I'm not upset we didn't get a solid answer either, because both did achieve something from this whole story. Both recognize a spark of what could be a closer relationship, and the story is open-ended as to if you want them to be close friends or lovers. It's a very subtle narrative that I don't think has a lot of attention drawn to it, but it's these little moments like these that really sell the Dragon Age-ness of the story. Like I've said time and again, what Dragon Age is to me, and what I think it does best, isn't the epic battles or ancient gods, but how people react to these situations and the emotional journeys they go through. This is why I think the story feels like a real Dragon Age story, while some of the other tie-in medias really don't do a great job, and then feels out of place. While a small detail, Renka seems to come in and out of the fog a lot. The werewolves and origins do this as well, and I can't quite tell if this is a callback to that, or some power that the werewolves have. Perhaps another callback is Willem's yellow eyes when he turns back into a human. In Origins, the healed werewolves also had yellow eyes for the rest of their lives. I'm not sure why this would be a permanent change from the curse, and I wonder if there are any others, but for now we haven't had a lot of used to be a werewolf but they got better characters to really base it off of, so... I don't think it came out very well in the summary, but Antoine is an Orlesian elf and speaks a fair amount of Orlesian or French in the story. Now, if you don't have Google Translate nearby and don't speak French, most of the French he says he later translate on his own or are similar enough to English to understand the meaning. So something I had to cut out of the summary was that a lot of little narrative points were actually set up and then paid off in the story. The Canary fireworks were mentioned much earlier than when they were used. The thing that Antoine threw at the werewolf's head was a sweet roll that he had bought when getting the fireworks. Antoine always needs a plan and needs to start letting Evka know about them. There are a lot of details in the story that do eventually pay off, and I'm sorry I just had to cut out so many of them for time. But this is one of those stories that is kind of fun on a second read-through to know where things lead on. Another thing I had to cut out is that the hunger demon is still alive. We don't really know where, but it's still out there, hunting, although it's weak. One assumes that it's still around the village and that perhaps almost all the village's misfortune maybe are even caused by it. While I don't think it would come back in the series for us, there might be a chance. From Joy, the Grey Wardens in Hunger and the Horror of Hormak are heroes. If I had not personally played a Grey Warden and been introduced to the series through Duncan, then my opinion of the Grey Wardens would not be very favorable at this point. In contrast, the Wardens we get perspective from in the story and Horrors of Hormak are not only human and relatable, but trying to do noble things. They're looking for lost comrades, fighting monsters, making sacrifices for the greater good, and responding to requests for help, Darkspawn or no. This is actually a really good point, as there are a fair amount of people who have not played Origins. I almost want to say that BioWare knew that players would be so trusting of the Wardens after Origins that they have tried to knock them down ever since, and I think we're starting to get to the point where BioWare is needing to show them being heroes again just to level it out. Joy will later go on to say, this uplifting mood is setting us up for the Civil War of the Grey Wardens, highlighting the good before driving into another story of corruption, and I can't help but think she's right there. So continuing on with the list of most new lore to least new lore, how would this week's story stack up with last week's? I really love Callback, and the bit about the regret demon and that it was formed from all this regret that Soulless had during his time in the Inquisition was very interesting to me. But if anything, I think this tells us a lot more about his mindset during Inquisition than he ever does in the game. The bits about where the various Skyhold NPCs are up to now are also delightful. However, in terms of new lore, I would probably put this in the middle of the road. As while fun and interesting, it's not really earth-shattering, but it does probably build up the, well, I guess probably the villain for the next game. So for now, I'll put it above 3 Trees to Midnight. Lucky in the Gardens is a fun little adventure story and adds in the new lore that there are monsters that are not demons but could be beyond the veil. However, I also want to deduct points as it doesn't really give us anything solid other than Beyond the Veil is really spooky. However, it also adds in the new Lords of Fortune and some very small world building for Tevinter, both of which seems more likely to come up in the next game, so I'll be putting this one above Callback unless we learn in the future that none of this actually comes back, and then I would have rated it lower. Hunger is, while a fun little adventure and character-driven story, lacking in any new lore to the series, so automatically gets thrown on the bottom. Everything we learn we already have known, minus the new village in the Anderfels is unlikely to come back. However, I would like to stress that I still really like the story and would rate it above many others in this collection given a different ranking system, but it is what it is. And with that, thank you to everyone who submitted entries, and I look forward to what everyone comes up with next. If you have any comments, artwork, or anything else, please send it in. Our next section consists of the stories Murder by Death Mages, The Streets of Menrathis, and The Wigmaker of Tevinter Nights. So please send me your things by April 19th, 2020. Send me an email at gildathon@gmail.com or PM@gildathon on Twitter. Duras Sherrill.